Hey, what's up, everybody? We're back. It's time for another podcast, Wargamer Talk. All right. Get the comments up here. We got 4 topics we're talking about today. I revealed one of them in the title of today's podcast. If you could notice, been busy. I was able to get out in the field today or this week, Monday through Wednesday. Thursday and Friday, of course, we got another cold snap here in central Ohio and beautiful Delaware, Ohio. And so welcome everybody on the replay of today's podcast. Get on over to my Discord group. Look at some of my previous videos. The last 10 videos, I've got Discord link there. And then I'm going to stop putting up Discord links because I want to kind of keep the group kind of small. I don't want it to get too big. We're at 25 members now in the Discord group. And so getting some people here into the chat today. Welcome, everybody. And we'll get things rolling here. We're going to roll the podcast for 1 hour, approximately 15 minutes per topic. I have 4 topics. Yes, 4 topics. Hey, what's up, Simon? Simon's in the house. I got some work started this week. Keeping a close eye on the economy. I have an established business, so we'll see what happens. Hey, Matt Garbino is in the house. Hello, Matt. Good to have you back. And got a few more minutes here. We're going to officially get the first topic started. Anyone remember what the topic is? Wargaming saved my life. Yes, we're going to avoid any drama. Of course, I cannot stand drama. So we're not going to get into deep mental health issues here with that title, but we are going to talk about kind of a salacious tag title. But we are going to talk today, guys, about how wargaming and really any type of hobby can make you a nicer, better person and make you happier. Studies have shown this makes you happier when you have one or more hobbies. I have my indoor hobby and I have my outdoor hobbies. As many of you know who follow the channel know that my wife and I are avid cyclists, and we are in the process of doing a video series on our other channel, cataloging all of the rail trail systems here in Ohio, which we're getting close to completing this season. We had a delay last year with the COOF, right? The COOF got in the way last year of some of the travels. So I took some of the money we would take normally in the winter for traveling, say, to Florida, and sunk it into the channel. Okay, another big investment in the channel. So let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead and get the first topic started. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my cutaway. And so Psychology Today, I pulled up this article. It's pretty interesting. It basically addresses, hobbies help you cope with stress. Imagine a rough day at the office where you were harshly criticized by your boss. Coming home and turning on the TV may provide a brief distraction, but it doesn't address your damaged ego head on. So you can see here, this is something that's out there. You can find these articles all over the place. All right, we got Sammy coming in. Hey, what's up? Hey,
how you doing?
Good to see you finally. Welcome to the podcast. Getting into the first topic here, Sammy, maybe you can cut in and maybe comment on some of this. Is our Psychology Today article I just pulled up, and we're talking about how hobby time and hobbying in general, no matter what hobby it is, makes you a happier person. What are your thoughts?
Oh, definitely. I think Yeah, I think people that don't have hobbies, they tend to get a bit more stressed about things, don't they? you know, I think it's all very well having family time, having work time, going out with friends, but you need to kind of invest in yourself a little bit, and what you find interesting. I think it makes you a more balanced person, doesn't it?
Correct. Absolutely. It's all about balance. You can't be all work and no play. I found that out the hard way years ago. I was a workaholic for sure, but you learn as you get older and wiser, I guess. But like you said, a lot of guys can get stressed over the hobby,
Oh yeah.
which isn't a good thing. Can't take it too seriously. Um, so I know you're back from a hiatus. You had taken a break from hobbying, and at least wargaming. So what's kind of your brief history of your hobby? Where did you get started? Did you get started with like 40K?
Um, yeah. I mean, I think I started off with 40K. Um, but my interests kind of, I remember getting into kind of military stuff in general. When
Right.
maybe I remember reading the Shark books by Bernard Cornwell. Have you heard of those?
No,
And
I have not.
that was all about the Peninsular War. It started off in India, I believe, actually. So it was all during that period, and it was Bernard Cornwell was actually a historian. So, but the characters involved in the book, Richard Sharp, the main character, he was actually started off as a grunt in the in the war in India, I believe. And I actually picked up the book where they were in Pennsylvania. Sorry, not Pennsylvania, in the Peninsula, and it was all about being in Wellington's army. And he rose up through the ranks, and he was kind of looked down upon because he was one of the only most of the time officers were as you know they bought their commissions.
Correct.
He was kind of very rough around the edges, and he was one of the rare people that kind of. So he was a fictional character, but all the other characters and the events were real. So I think that piqued my interest in it, and then I think I got into 40K because I had a friend at school who was kind of into it, and then I started collecting. I think I went to an air show like at Duxford. We see all the airplanes and all that.
Right.
And I remember because we had a science teacher that was quite into. He had a model club on Thursdays, which is quite cool at the school. So everyone brought whatever models they had, whatever they're into. Most people were into the airfix stuff.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, so I got into, and then I got into I can't remember what scale they were. They were smaller than Warhammer. I'd say half the size perhaps, and they were yeah, it was Napoleonic. So I got a load of red coats, painted them up. Got some Scots, got some French, and I didn't even know about any rules at the time. So me and my friend would just make up rules and you know build little
Right.
kind of fortifications and whatnot. And yeah, it started off with that really, and then collecting Ultramarines, um, and then moved on to what did I move on to? Imperial Guard, I think.
Right.
And then I think, oh yeah, and then I think I painted a few ships, Napoleonic ships. That was fun, but I'm talking about huge scale.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, and then life got in the way, and I kind of forgot about it. And then I think during this recent lockdown, because it was so boring.
Yes, I can
I
only imagine. See, I was fortunate. I have an outdoor job, so here at least we weren't restricted, especially in property maintenance. We were let loose. However, the day after our governor announced the lockdown in our state, I had some lady, it was like second or third stop of the day. She came out and started yelling at me. You're
oh
not allowed
yeah,
to be here. I
I
said,
think you said that on your
okay.
last podcast or something. Yeah, I remember
I'm
that.
like, you guys need to chill out. But I'm outside.
Yeah,
Anyways, but yeah, I mean, this is a common thread we have amongst wargamers. This interest from oftentimes from when we're young into militaria. This and like for me, it was the plastic army helmet and the gun, the
yeah,
toy gun. We had woods behind our apartment complex. Where as a young lad we would spend hours and hours playing army back there. We built forts and all kinds of things, and that's kind of segue to my our next topic in the podcast. Because we obviously get something from this hobby. It makes us happier. It takes our minds off of, especially guys, once you hit 40 and you got a career of any kind, I don't care if you're a doctor or a janitor, it starts to get a little humdrum after a while because it's literally pretty much doing the same thing every day. Yeah, there's peaks and valleys, but when you come home, and you can go to your hobby area, whether it's just a fold-up table like I started with, just a card table, to having an entire area that's dedicated to your hobby, like I now have. It takes my mind off of that, and I think it does the same thing for all of us. And that's a good thing, and especially if you can get outside and hike or bike or whatever you like to do outside, you can do the same thing. But tying this back into our youth and how we are attracted to military things, like you said, airplanes for Sammy, tanks, whatever it is, infantry, or just wargaming in general, like picking up your first bag of army men and playing in the dirt.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of escapism as well, isn't it? Adventurism.
Right. And like you said, the reading of the books, I can remember some of my first novels were Lord of the Rings. And then as soon as we went to the bookstore to get some more, I think we were reading Conan the Barbarian, my friends and I.
Oh, yeah.
And we were going back to get more books, and there was the basic D&D set at our local bookstore. And then that was all she wrote. We started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it was every Friday and Saturday night, the total little nerd band geeks, popping popcorn and watching scary movies and playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? But so this is an attraction that's that really comes through a lot of the gamers. And I've always a good friend of mine and I went to a convention that's in Eastern Pennsylvania, and we stopped at Gettysburg. We stopped at Antietam. You can go back and look at those videos, guys. But something we talked about on that 8-hour drive, maybe a 6-hour drive, we were talking about this and why we are so attracted to these time periods. For you seem to gravitate towards Napoleonics. For me, it was American Civil War. And I've always was interested in it since I'm from Central Kentucky originally, and hearing the stories and things from my relatives who raised horses for the Confederate Army. And I've always asked, why is it we're so drawn to certain specific time periods, not just gaming or military in general? And I found some interesting articles. Let me go ahead and get this. And we'll bring it up. This is something that's really interesting. There's a lot out there on the net about this topic, actually. And I'll go ahead and bring it up here, Sammy, so we can look at this.
Yeah.
This was on Quora. It's basically just a forum out there. Do you ever feel like you belong in a certain time period in history? If so, where and when? And as I've talked to gamers over the years at the conventions and things, I have heard this from a lot of guys. Now, a lot of guys believe in reincarnation. I'm a Southern Baptist in heart. I'm not a big Bible thumper. I don't push my religion on people, but we're told that that's blasphemous. Where you're not allowed to believe in reincarnation. And I've always thought about that. What if we were one of those soldiers fighting in the Napoleonic era? And that's why we're so interested in it. And it's just in us. And we talked about this, Rob and I, on our drive to Gettysburg. And he didn't really agree with me. He said, no, I don't think that's it. And he brought up something that I hadn't really thought about. He said, what about our DNA?
Yeah,
what if one of our relatives from the past was involved in these conflicts?
Yeah.
And it's been passed down through our DNA, and it's just in us that way. What are your thoughts?
I think you're right. I think I think your friend might be right. I think part of it is in our genetic DNA. Right. I think the same way we evolved to be fearful of snakes.
Right.
It's like people that were people that weren't careful, for example. The reason we're here today is because our ancestors were careful.
Yes.
If you think about how lucky all of us are to be here, every war that's ever existed, all those battles, time and time again,
yes,
we are the offspring of the survivors of each of those generations.
Right.
So I think it's like being afraid of the snake in the Bible. It's there's a reason we're fearful of those things because, and I think there's a morbid curiosity to it. You know, you see crime dramas are very popular, especially amongst the female demographic at the moment. But you know, there's a morbid curiosity, I think, and I think also it reminds us of our own mortality as well. You know, and I think as much as it's nice to think, oh, what time period do I belong in? If I honestly look back, I think it's a very brutal world to go back to any time period. You know?
Absolutely. And we often forget about that, you know, the medical advances,
Yeah.
the just having heat, you know, like
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
guys in Texas just recently experienced what it's like to not have heat for
Yeah.
several days, and it's 5 degrees outside. So
My
people
boiler broke
quickly,
down for a couple of months. Well, my boiler broke down for maybe about 2 weeks in the winter, and oh my god, there was a strike on as well, so they weren't repairing it. And oh my god, I had the gas fire on in the front room. I had to move down and sleep in the front room, and it was horrible. No hot water, even just for I think it was about 10 days, and
oh boy,
really wasn't fun, you know. And it kind of made me realize that people are used to that, you know, and
right,
that's still with power, you know.
right. And the hardships, but they were used to it, so they didn't think
Mm,
as much of it as we would. They just had to stoke the fire, and they had to bundle up at night, and they obviously got by. But even in the warfare back then, it was much more brutal.
yeah,
American War of Independence, literally just marching right up to each other and shooting at each other.
yeah.
So yeah, this is some interesting stuff. If any of you guys out there want to chime in on this, I know we got some guys here in the chat. If you want to comment on this, maybe bring up maybe a ancillary topic here. But
But Alan, on that point, actually, I'd be interested in your opinion. But I always thought to myself, you know, if you had to be a soldier in a war, there's no good time to be a soldier in a war. But I always think for me the two worst periods must have been the First World War and the Napoleonic War, or anything to do with the musket period in American Civil War. As you say, the idea of marching up real close to another line of men and firing at each other, and it's just such an unnatural feeling not to. You know, at least in the medieval period, I guess you can kind of duck, even though it's probably
right,
not doing much. You can fire that, but mentally, you know, you can duck, you can weave, you can dodge. But the idea of just standing there and just, you know, bullets coming at you, half your regiment dying, and just standing there, I think that's a very unnatural feeling, you know.
forcing guys over the trenches to
Yeah,
attack the other side, and you know that the machine guns are firing away.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's it's an interesting psychological thing. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine, but this is maybe some of the programming you're taught. You couldn't be a coward, and you needed to face the enemy. It was the chivalry aspect, maybe, which made men say, "Hey, if I turn back, well, with the Soviets' case, you would get shot
same, same as
if you didn't go forward."
same as most periods. I think if you stood there, there's a chance of dying, and if you turn around, you're definitely gonna
Correct.
get hung, or your commander's gonna deal with you.
And the whole shame of being called a coward.
Mm.
So yeah, we got Matt chiming in here. Hearing my dad and uncles talk about World War II really got me interested in military history. Right. Yeah, I mean, like I experienced the same thing with my grandfather and my other relatives, great uncles, talking about the old days and serving in the military. We got Simon chiming in, the wizard, sticking it to them in the face must be a lot better, right? Well, that's the time periods we talked about where you had to get right up in the Roman period and put your gladius in the guy's chest, and the other where you're firing maybe from afar, or you're a line troop coming up and point blank firing at each other. Now, granted, the muskets weren't very accurate, but there was the skipping cannonballs and all the other things that were in effect. Like in the Patriot movie, which is one of my favorite AWR
That's a great
movies.
movie, yeah.
And just crazy to think about that. But yeah, these are the time periods I talked to guys over the years, and it's like they only play maybe 2 time periods. And I got a guy in our group, he will only play World War II. He says, if you're not playing World War II, I'm not interested. So that's
I
where
love all of it. I love all of it. You know.
I do too, and it's nice to be able to broaden my palette now that I can play, and instead of just paint and build, I can actually get into the rule sets and play all the different periods I've wanted to play. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the aspects of the hobby that other people will say, "Oh, what's this? Why are you doing that hobby? That's stupid." But to us, it's no mystery. I've been interested in this since I was a little kid, and um, so that's not going to change anytime soon.
No.
But
I was going to ask you actually. I was thinking about this today. I was thinking, the idea of being interested in, so say strategy, for example, you kind of can't help but, I'd say there's a bit of creativity in there, and there is something to do with admiration for strategy, isn't there? Especially with
yes,
gaming. Do you think that helps you in any way in normal life?
I am now that I'm able to play more games and get into rule sets. Like I just put the video up about the Black Seas, learning about wind gauge or weather gauge, and how important maneuvering your ship to be upwind or downwind, depending on what your strategy was, and the positioning of your troops and using your cavalry and coordinating the attacks, which we'll be doing here on March 20th with the Hail Caesar rules. This will be the first time we've actually brought archery to the game table for that.
I look forward to seeing that. I'm excited for that.
So yeah, so that's one of the topics we'll talk about. The last topic is that upcoming game. But so yeah, that's and I want to get a couple catapults. I want to get more scorpions, so that I can bring more artillery elements to the game. And then, of course, your cavalry units swooping in from the flanks. And this is what I've enjoyed learning, because I don't know very much other than the movies I've watched of Roman period battles, and learning about how they fought. There's a lot out there once you start digging. How they basically operated, because something that touched on it, and I watched the other day, was the Gladiator, the opening scene where they're fighting the barbarians, and how they started out like most, even World War One, they started with an artillery barrage and soften up the troops a little bit.
Yeah. If you're interested in that, I think there's a good book by Niccolo Machiavelli. His famous book, The Prince, obviously, which coined the phrase Machiavellian. It's all about obviously politics. But he wrote another book called Machiavelli on War, and it's obviously during the Renaissance period, and he goes back to studying ancient warfare, and because they almost, after the Dark Ages and the medieval period, they kind of lost their way with the kind of, if you look at the Alexander the Great and the Romans, they had such refined tactics on the battlefield, and that kind of went a little bit more casual, especially in the Dark Ages. We know it almost went back to the mobs just running at each other, and they were, in that period, they were really trying to discover. I think we're talking the late 1600s, early 1700s here. So it was kind of that gap between the formation of lining up, and it's interesting. That's a good book to check out, because he does cover a lot of that kind of Roman structure and how to move it into the modern period, and sorry, and there are some questions as how the Romans formed up, which is debated often, and when they say that the three lines there, how did they say, you had the is it the Equatoria in the first, the young fresh soldiers in the first line, and then they had the slightly more aged soldiers in the second line, and they had the Triarii line. And when you think about that, them pressed up against each other, how did they rotate those troops? And there's been so much debate on how that was done, and some people think there was actually a checkerboard, as it were. So rather than having the straight line, you have the first, one bunch of troops there, and then you have the second bunch of troops slightly behind on the corner, as it were. And they thought, maybe there was kill zones, and that's how they just interchanged like that, almost like a checkerboard,
Right.
No one knows. Right. Not really answered.
Yep, there's just accounts, and a lot of the accounts that you find that were written were maybe 100 years after the empire really had fallen. and it was just hearsay a lot of
Yeah.
times. So yeah, it's just it's kind of a bit of a mystery. But yeah, running the lines and then switching the lines out, so they had the fresh troops where they would rotate in, and you had probably your centurion barking orders at everyone. But the other aspect, and we deal with this a lot in the World War II gaming, is the RECE, or the recon element of
Mm.
what they did through history. I can identify with this personally, because my nephew, who used to play with my son and I down here all the time, Flames of War, back in the Flames of War days, was he is currently he's in a recon cavalry unit, and that's what they do. They're either driving around in their Humvees and they're scouting. And you think about all of the scouting elements that had to be done.
Mm.
When we went to Gettysburg, the little cavalry elements that were out way ahead of the Confederates, reporting back to Lee the lay of the land, and he certainly did not want to fight in Gettysburg. That was not his ground of choice. The Union held the high ground, and relying on that information, that intel. Today we got satellites and they've got spies and things, but back then it was literally a guy on a horse riding out, risking his life if he could get captured or not. And then his account of where he thought the troops were, what the strength of the troops were, and I'm sure in the Roman period was similar. He would have scouts that would go out ahead, and you try to get a reconnoiter of what is the enemy up to, right?
Yeah.
Are they amassing? Is this just going to be a trap? Is there a trap? And all the things they had to take into account. So it's easy for us to be critical. Why didn't they do this as like a Monday morning quarterbacking, where you can sit around and say, why didn't they call this play? I grew up in a household that was football crazy, so I heard this crap growing up, and I'm like, look, when you're down on the ground and you're calling the shots, it isn't always clear cut, and a lot of times
and also we always when we look back at history, we see these TV programs, we get the top down view or the game we play, but you got to remember that general was sitting there from a first person perspective, sometimes involved in the fighting.
Right, and there was the weather element. There was like in Waterloo, there was, there was all these other factors, and it was really a lot of times a big gamble, and it just came down to sometimes just blind luck, if you won a battle or not. So yeah, I mean, I've heard of this too, Simon, is where he had a guy in our club that would not play anything after World War I. It was too close to the time period. It was too sensitive for him. He didn't want to deal with that. And yes, cavalry is an army's eyes and ears.
2 minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem. So guys, this is some interesting stuff, man. We have all these things that are coming together that make us want a war game. And I think we're kind of in agreement here with Sammy that this is just in our DNA. It's in our structure. That's why it's so hard if you try to thwart a male's instinct. The male's instinct is to club the critter over the head and drag it back to the cave for dinner. It's just our male DNA and our instincts, where we want to conquer and control. And it's been that way probably since we were cavemen, right, guys? So we've got another topic here we're going to segue into, and that is tying right into what we're talking about. And that is more in the line of list building and learning about the armies that we play with. This is something that I was telling Sammy here, I'm just getting used to this period. So I got my Marian list, and I've highlighted the units that I'm bringing. And I'm like, what the hell is Marian? I had no clue what that even was.
Pre-Marian, yeah.
This is what leads us down the path when we get into a time period or we get into something, and it's just one thing after another. I started playing American War of Independence 2 years ago, Rise and Fight Again rule set, and I thought, I know all this about the American War of Independence. I used to call it the Revolutionary War. And they would say, no, we don't call it that. It's the American War of Independence. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. But I learned so much building those armies and learning. I've got a couple books I bought on the uniforms, and then another book about how the armies were structured, how they were supplied back in that era. And let me go ahead. I will bring that. I think I got a Wikipedia prepped for us here on the Marian. The Marian reforms.
It's Gaius Julius Caesar's uncle, I believe.
Yes. Pretty interesting. The bottom line is we went from a period that was very strict on who they would take into the military. And you had to be a member of the 5th census class, it says here, which was a taxpayer. You had to own property worth 3,500 sesterces, and you had to supply your own armaments. And so, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Here's Gaius Marius. See. Yeah, Gaius Marius, which the reform was speaking about. Now, here's the bottom line, the way I see it. They had to make it more lax to get troops because as they were coming into the later half of the 2nd century, Rome was getting weaker, right? They'd spread out pretty far. So they had to really start taking just about anybody into the military.
Yes, I think at this point I think they were just moved into Gaul, hadn't they? They just started to penetrate that northern. They were
getting their butts kicked.
Yeah, that's right.
And losing lots of troops. They lost an entire legion, the Lost Legion. So yeah, they had to start bending the rules on who they took into the army.
Yeah.
So the first thing that strikes me in this Marian Roman list, as I started going through this period.
Are you playing? Is that what you're going to play on your next game?
Correct. This will be for our Hail Caesar.
Gotcha.
Now Philip is bringing his Macedonian army. We're playing 500 points each. And what struck me is the makeup of their units from the Imperial Roman list that's in this book, this army list book, which is the classical period. And this list period is, you're starting to see a lot more auxiliaries in this list. Basically conquered lands where they've rolled troops into their army. And you're finding that
in the later period, you mean? Yeah.
Correct. The Marian is a later period. And you're starting to see a lot of, they got Spanish troops. We got Thracian troops. I'm going to be bringing some Gallic or Galatian medium infantry. I'm bringing my regular legionary, but they're limited. I think I can only bring 4 units. So they were limited on, the regular troops. Yeah. Then I'm bringing skirmishers armed with bows. So they're pretty weak. I have to kind of hold them off to the flanks maybe and fire into the enemy. I'm bringing my cavalry, but it's not Roman cavalry. It's Gallic medium cavalry, right? So, and then I've got my light artillery, my Scorpion bolt throwers. Those are pretty standard. Of course, I'm bringing my elephant. I have 1 elephant that I'm bringing. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And that's part of one of the multifacets of this hobby is, like we talked about in our private chat the other day, Sammy, was, being students of history and learning more about history as we get into these time periods. Like I said, there's stuff I would have never known unless I was playing this army in this period, and how people forget and are not students of history. And it is unfortunately repeating itself right in front of our very eyes, with the control and the loss of freedoms.
It's like, I think every time, it's like now we have we've had all the veterans of the Second World War almost die out now, haven't we? And I think the big fear is once the next generation kind of has, I don't know how soon it might be, but once you get that a couple of generations that haven't had the stories. So let's say our kids, or let's say the next generation who don't have the grandparents who can tell them about the war.
Right.
It's almost like when on the First World War. Do you remember when all the Britons were signing up for the war? Lord Kitchener said, "Right, we need more troops. We've only got 100,000 or something." And he wanted 100,000 sign up, and he got something like 2 million or something crazy sign up, and and they all thought it would be over by Christmas, and they had a romanticized version of war because I guess they hadn't had a big war. You know, it'd only been small professional troops going off and fighting before. And I think that's the danger we have, as you say, with the restriction of freedoms. You know, not knowing how dangerous communism is. You know, not knowing the dangers of war, this aggression. You know, bombing other countries, and you know, it's serious stuff. And I think if you kind of remove that from a generation, before you know it, you're at war again.
Right. And that's typically where a lot throughout history, when a society is having either the citizens are kind of getting unruly and getting ready to rise up on you, you want to have a nice big war.
Distract them, yeah, keep them busy.
And it's looking like it's Iran is in the crosshairs right now.
Oh yeah,
we'll see how that works. But yeah, so and then the other thing that happened before our U.S. election, I mean, we won't get too political, but I had not realized that we still have so many U.S. troops in Europe still. I mean, they've literally have divisions of troops still over there.
You got a lot. You got a lot in. Well, originally there were a lot of them in Germany, weren't there? Based in Germany, but now you've got the reactionary force, which has been developed to counter the Russian offensive, potential Russian offensive. So you've got, I think, the US. You've got Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. And I think the British are in the north training the Estonian troops, and then you've got the Americans in one of the countries below. But yeah, I think that there's a decent force there, which are there almost all the time now, training constantly, just ready to resist any attack from the Russians. Which I think, you know, is unlikely that we're going to get attacked from the Russians. I think it's going to be a lot more. I think warfare is changing. I think it's. I don't think you're going to get these large war that you used to. I think it's a lot of it is going to be terror groups. A lot of it's going to be, hijackings and and things like electronic attacks, things like that. I don't think the Russians will come pouring over the borders with tanks.
And economic warfare.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's interesting, and they can use
satellite warfare.
And it happened back through the Roman periods, where they would go to war with people to just produce, like now, economic stimulus, and they could take more lands and more assets from someone and roll it into their assets. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting watching this stuff play out. They say the United States' #1 export is war now. That is our main export. We're making lots of planes and ships and guns and bullets over here. And we want to sell them to you.
Well, yeah. Who does it producing all these weapons? You know, the people that fund these governments are often. I'm not sure how deep we want to go into this. You might get banned off YouTube. Right. Yeah, it's the people that put the politicians in power. Most of them are involved in the weapons industry. So even though it might cost the country, the country itself might go into debt. The people who put these people into power, their pockets are lined. So, I'll say no more.
Military-industrial complex. Yeah. We have over here Raytheon Corporation, General Dynamics, and on, and some of these sub manufacturers that no one even knows who they are. My father is a retired audiologist, but he did the company he helped start with another guy. They did industrial hearing testing. So over here, there's a requirement if you work in a loud factory, you have to provide you with, hearing protection, et cetera, et cetera. But it's another government overreach as far as I'm concerned. But they decided to profit from that. So they would go around in these big trailers and they would test people's hearing. It was required by the government. And OSHA and all the standards for factories. Well, my dad was testing some plant here in Ohio, their company that made shoelaces for the military. That's all this factory did was make shoelaces. And my dad said they had like acres of warehouses that were full of shoelaces. And I'm like, why do they need that many shoelaces? He said they don't, but it employs everyone in this little town in Ohio you've never heard of, and they won't shut it down because if they did, the town would collapse. And all they do all day is make shoelaces. And I'm like, so how many shoelaces do they have? He said, I was told that they literally have shoelaces that were made for the Korean War, just rotting in a warehouse, basically.
I can back that up. Personal experience. I mean, when I was around 14, 15, my dad, always used to start little businesses here and there, and we were looking, he was trying to get me involved in business. So I said, he said to me, why don't you help me come up with I want to open a shop. Why don't you, he'd had pet stores, all sorts of weird stuff in the past. And he said, I want to open up a shop. So we looked into a friend of mine at school. He, the Ministry of Defence in the UK, the MOD, they are the ones that give out all the contracts to the subcontractors who make all the equipment. And at this time, we were, I think it was the Afghan War was really kicking off, and it was one of the summer offensives, and we had. I'm getting mixed up here. So anyway, let me start off by saying we decided to get into the army surplus business. So we ended up a couple of army surplus stores, and so we were selling all the kind of the traditional stuff you'd imagine, camo trousers, anything related to the military, and it was all. What we used to do is we used to go down to this big warehouse in Southend, and these big containers would come off of, straight from Iraq, straight from Afghanistan, straight from wherever. And they'd have people there, immigrants mostly, kind of sorting out grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And grade 3 would be shrapnel and blood all over the trousers. They'd throw them in the bin. But some of it, the majority of it, was never used, as you say. So you had all this stuff that was coming off, and it was never used. Brand new boots, brand new Gore-Tex, all this stuff. And we were selling it in our shop. And what was really disgusting at the time was it was a big crisis in the newspapers about our troops being very unequipped. And there was young lads going out there trying to fight the Taliban, and they were in these unarmored vehicles, no body armor, nothing. And we used to have the mothers coming in to buy stuff to send out to their kids on tour, and so we used to give them a massive discount. It just showed you how they're producing all this stuff, and it wasn't getting to the troops, but it was getting for us. But the MOD was allowed to sell it. It's just and it shows you that it wasn't an issue of not enough stuff being made. If anything, there was more than enough stuff being made. It just wasn't getting to the right people. And I don't know what you make of that, but it just seemed very wrong,
Blatant mismanagement by worthless bureaucrats.
Yeah, hopefully it was mismanagement and not something more sinister, but yeah, it's terrible.
Well, there's the stories I've read where the periods, like you talked about, the 1700s, the 1600s, 1500s, where the kings would get together and say, hey, the natives are a little restless. There's too many of them where it's getting hard to feed them all. Let's have us a good old-fashioned war. I'll slap you across the face with my gloves, and you say you're offended, and we'll have us a nice little war. That'll decrease the surplus population. So, yeah, you kind of hope that it's not an issue of population control, but yet it's also a grab for resources. Controlling the oil industry, of course, which that's now a bad business to be in. But yeah, I mean, it's all this stuff comes intertwined, guys, and that's why it's great to learn this stuff as we game and ponder these things, because we get wiser and less fooled, and learned real quickly to not watch the media, and learn to think and read for ourselves. And that's really important. But yeah, I mean, I always call this hobby a jewel, and this is just one of the many facets of why it's so fascinating. And we're actually seeing a lot more guys in the group and on my subscriber list. I've talked with guys over at Little Wars TV. They've done a series on wargaming to let's say the 20-somethings. And we're seeing it. They are coming into the more historical side. One of the hooks on my channel is using, I've always wanted to use other game systems, but lure them in on the 40K and sell them on historical. And I think we're starting to see that. One is fantasy and make-believe, and the other aspect is based on real life, tragedies and stories. That we all need to know about and we need to learn about. And this is, and we touched on this a few podcasts ago about the fear of, well, not the fear, I don't like to operate on fear, but the concern is that these types of games or these types of interests will be starting to be frowned upon because it's something nobody wants to talk about. We want to forget the past, and we don't want to bring these things up. And that's what Matt, was it Simon, touched on that, where there's an individual who said, "Oh, I can't, I don't want to play those types of games because it's bad and it makes me think of bad things." And then,
Was he not? I assumed he was a veteran when you mentioned that earlier, or something like that.
yeah, he probably was, and he's, it's a sensitive subject.
Yeah,
You can't have Mark Zuckerberg reaching into your group and saying you had little Nazi flags on your.
Oh, that was ridiculous.
So in this kind of stuff, I sent a little.
By the way, it's fine to have a hammer and sickle. By the way, even though it's starting to kill more people.
Right, and I just got some of those in the other day, and I thought, should I put a picture? Should I put a picture on this up, or am I going to get banned again? So I sent. So,
that's without the Russian Civil War, which Bolsheviks, which actually more people died than the First World War.
Yes,
just in the Russian Civil War. So if you add that up alongside the Stalinist massacres,
it's almost uncountable. And same with Pol Pot, and you get into Mao Zedong and all these other conflicts.
That's Mao. Yeah.
Your Mr. Mao, and that was the total cultural revolution where you couldn't say anything against what.
But maybe it's a part of, as they say, history being written by the victors. Maybe because the Nazis lost, that became the thing you can't talk about. And then because communism is alive and well right now, maybe that's fine. I don't know. It's even though they're both authoritarian regimes that led to the deaths of a lot of people, only one of them is bad. I mean, we think they're both bad, but it's history, so we like to talk about them. And if we're playing World War II, you've got Wehrmacht versus Russian troops. I don't know what to say. It is what it is. That's how we avoid these things, by learning about them.
We can't cave into the denial of facts, and these are things that really happen. And I guess the thing that the war games illustrated, the big players in the industry can communicate to these bureaucrats that we're not applauding these things. We're just fascinated by history, and by, like you said, one of my favorite things is the strategy, and learning about that. Well, why would you want to focus on war? It's just war. And it's like same thing with video games. You got the violence in video games. My big thing when my son was still living at home was Call of Duty and Battlefront. I mean, we played all those games, and they don't seem to have a problem with that. So let's hope that doesn't creep into our hobby. I think it's a little bit. And since I'm a Patreon of Little Wars TV, a supporter of their channel financially, I'm in contact with them, and they just put up a game that they did at the club, which was American Civil War, and several of Confederate units had Confederate flags, and I told them, "Hey guys, let me know if you have any issues when you put this up on YouTube." They always put it on Patreon first, and then they put it on YouTube. And then I told them what I had experienced with my wound markers, and it's going to be interesting to see moving forward because I really didn't put much up in form of a comment, but someone either reported me or some bot somehow identifies, and think about how scary that is.
They better take down all the videos of Thomas Jefferson then as well, because he was a slave owner, I guess, or who's the other guy? Pretty much all of those guys in American history were slave owners. I mean, but what do you not talk about those guys as well? I mean,
right. And it's a lot. It was
how far do you go?
It's complicated too, because a lot of people don't realize. In this case of Washington, he inherited his slave from his wife.
Yeah.
And then you dig in a little deeper. I watched a historian the other day in a lecture series I'm watching on the slavery period of the Civil War. And that was, and even the American War of Independence was, a lot of times they would borrow money to, say, make a still. That was a big thing back then on your farm. A plantation is just a farm. So one of the side businesses, most plantation owners or large farmers like George Washington would get into would be running a big distillery. It was a big business, obviously, like it is today. But the point is they would borrow money like most businessmen to expand their operation, a short-term loan of some kind, and they would use the slaves as collateral. Um, and he would say, a lot of times they were trapped. They would, like Thomas Jefferson wanted to free his slaves, but he couldn't. They were up for collateral. When he died, he was over $100,000 in debt, which is equivalent of like $10 million today or whatever. And we all know about Sally, his mistress, and she was his wife's half sister. So there's a lot of things there that are not being talked about that were factual with the case of, say, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. Then you got people like John Adams and things. They did not own slaves. Some of them didn't. They were lawyers. They were town lawyers.
And you got Lincoln, who's perpetrated this anti-slavist. But if you actually look at what he said in
yes,
in the past,
yes.
I'll let you say, because I only heard about it roughly. But
right, and these kids aren't being taught this, and that it's murky water when you get into it. Obviously, slavery is very wrong, obviously, but some of our kids over here, Sammy, are being taught that we started slavery.
Yeah.
When we came over here, we killed the Indians and we started slavery.
Well, the Americans had slavery for about 81 years, I believe, and it was only 1% of people that owned them. And let's not forget that millions of Americans died to stop it. It's one thing people forget. And it's gone on since the beginning of humanity.
Yes.
We all know it's terrible. No one would ever want to go back to that. But
the awful thing I've recently learned of in the last couple of years is there's still slavery out there.
Oh yeah, China especially.
And some of these African countries still have slave markets. Yeah. And I'm like, where's the UN? Where wouldn't we be swooping in and putting a stop to this? And I guess the money talks, and the morals walk where it's warranted. Let's Sammy, we'll take a couple questions here, a couple comments. Let's see. I can relate to that. I can play World War II and earlier, but Team Yankee is a bit too close to home for me because of my past deployments. Yeah, and that's a whole other, Matt, that's a whole other genre I have not delved into yet, which I want to do in the future. It would be modern warfare, and even like Team Yankee, where it's a quasi World War III environment, which is interesting to me to play out. But I can see guys who've been in those situations. You don't want to think about that necessarily. Simon says, no one talks about the slaves in the Arab world, correct? Yeah. I mean, this is the problem when we don't try to at least seek the truth and teach the truth, and it's propaganda. Because maybe if we were being taught that, hey, there's countries out there that still have slave markets, maybe that's what we need to focus on, is get the UN off their tails and let's go put a stop to it. Let's depose. I thought, the League of Nations and then the United Nations, one of the whole points of it was to put an end to the jerk-offs out there, these despots and these dictators, and we were going to all team up together, the British, the Americans, the French, who started the League of Nations after World War I, and we were going to put a stop to all this boondoggery in the world, and so that it wasn't exist, so we can put a stop to the future wars.
But that was the same idea behind Libya, which led to these slave markets, because I think it was led by the Macron. No, not Macron. He was the last French president. The French president that basically wanted to go into Libya. Mm-hmm. David Cameron, the British guy, went along with him. Hillary Clinton was desperate to get in there as well. And what happened? Well, they bombed the crap out of the country, and and Gaddafi, believe it or not, they used to call Libya the bottle top on Africa, or the cork in Africa, and they're actually keeping back the extremism, and I don't want to say certain keywords on here, but they were keeping back certain things which were kind of keeping it slightly stabilized there. And as soon as we decided to go in there and liberate them, like League of Nations style, look what happened. Now we stepped back, and now there's open slave markets. So I don't know if they're still there, but there certainly was a few years ago. I imagine they still are.
And it's the same with Saddam Hussein. At least he allowed Christian churches to exist in his
Yeah.
country, and not mercenaries, missionaries to come in.
Mm.
And then he was on the wrong side of whatever happened behind the scenes that ticked somebody off. I think it probably was the Saudi Arabians, but yeah, I mean, this is the silliness that goes on. If we think all the modern teaching and all of the information age, we could once and for all put a stop to war and take those resources and fix the roads and put in high-speed trains and make sure at least everyone has a decent place to live for a start. And the people that are living on the streets over here in the US are either drug addicts and or mentally ill.
A lot of veterans as well.
And a lot of veterans. And I would be happy to see my tax dollars going to put these people in proper facilities where they can really be helped. And if not helped, we could at least make sure that they have clean clothes and they have food to eat and they're being watched. Here in Columbus, Ohio, years ago, in a section of the city, there was several large buildings that were mental institutions. That's what they did. They would put you there and they would get you off the street.
Yeah.
Well, sometime when I was a teenager, I think there was a big rigmarole here in our city that the state was closing all of that.
Yeah,
they couldn't afford it anymore. And
same in Canada.
And they just literally they closed this mental hospital down, which is several blocks long, and several buildings, large buildings, and they just literally threw these people out on.
Here's your medication. Good luck.
Yeah, have a nice day.
That's
in the tent city under the
Yep.
overpass,
Yep.
And how crazy that is.
It seemed to happen at the same time all over the West, because I heard about this happening in Canada at the same sort of time and here. I mean, I don't quite get that.
It's like,
Why it all
are
happened at the
they
same
trying to create chaos? Are they profiting from chaos?
I think there was definitely a bit of a backlash. If you look at, remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and
Yes,
that's a great film. But there was that period where a lot of people were being sent there and they were mistreated. And there's those awful kind of things like lobotomies and putting people up. We really were okay, but they were kind of pumping them full of pills, and there were a lot of abuse going on there, sexual abuse and things like that. And I think there was a bit of a backlash to that, so it was almost seen as an answer. But at the same time, I don't think that's the full story. There seems to be something else there, as you say. Why they suddenly closed them all down? Was it to save tax money? Maybe, who knows?
They say they're saving it over here, but they waste it on the other. It's this unity.
Make more bombs.
The amount of money our government spends on our military is literally obscene. And I'm a conservative, libertarian-minded kind of guy, and I'm all for protecting our borders and protecting us against bad guys. But I mean, come on, this is getting out of control.
But then you've got to attack to defend. I'm joking, of course. I'm joking. How many countries in America in? It's like, what, 200 countries it's got troops in now or something like that?
Iranian-backed militia. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Show us, prove it. And, this is where we can get into some murky political.
Yeah.
Because we deal with, over here, it's the executive order.
Executive order, yeah. They used to have to go to Congress. In the old days, you have to go to Congress, get voted to actually go to war, but now they just skip that part.
Correct. War Powers Act, FDR. I have to be able to react quickly. Well, the Congress can react quickly. Tell them you got 24 hours to decide. Whatever. So they started this crap a long time ago.
Good old Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of the biggest psychopaths in history.
4-term president, which is unconstitutional.
Yeah. How do you get away with that? I don't know. I don't really know much about it.
Dude, when I really start studying American War of Independence, and I watched a couple of different series, how smart those guys were and how enlightened they were, the age of enlightenment, where they wanted to learn from the mistakes of history, and they wrote in documents to try to stop the problems from occurring in the first place and limiting the power of government. And the way that not Sam Adams, but John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the wordsmith. The words, he specifically chose specific words and sentence structures that could not be gotten around, and I was like, God, this guy was like thinking 200 years ahead of the game. He knew what was going to happen. And as soon as they started allowing to diverge from their constitution, that's when the big problems really kind of started. So yeah, we got Granddad. Welcome to the group. Welcome to the chat. I've never seen him here before, but welcome. Please come back in the future. We love to have guys contribute. I'm sick and tired of people telling me I'm glorifying war by having anything to do with war games or painting miniatures. Absolutely, sir. That's what we're talking about. And this whole agenda seems like all over the civilized world of denying the truth and this whole burying reality thing that's going on is really kind of alarming. And what some people believe, I'm like, I can't. How are you thinking that? That's not even the truth.
Yeah, it's it's like back in the old days. We'd look at this lighter here,
right?
And Republicans would say, "Okay, that's a lighter," and Democrats would say, "Yeah, that's a lighter. We can agree on that." But my perspective is this on that.
They might have started a forest fire.
Yeah, but now it's we show the same. We show this, and we see one thing, and the other side sees something completely different. So it's like when a news article is presented, and someone has done something. I look at it and go, "What's the problem?" Whereas, someone on the other side would look at it and be outraged, and that seems to be the problem these days. Is we're all looking at the same thing, but we just have completely different perspectives on it, and that seems to be the world we're living in.
Well, the game plan is to divide, and they're completely successful with it. We have elections over here; they can literally be decided by 2 or 3%. That's how divided everyone is, I think, all over the Western world.
Yeah.
So they have succeeded. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. He would send antagonists into a town he wanted to attack, maybe a year in advance, to try to get people fighting amongst each other and weaken the town or the city that he would later attack because they couldn't put up an adequate defense because he had weakened his foe. So there's a lot of interesting stuff like that has come up.
Talking of which, that program you recommended on the Discord chat about the Japanese stuff in the 1500s.
Right. Then that's something I'm bringing to the channel next year is the whole Age of Samurai.
Age of Samurai, yeah, that was it.
The whole it's so fascinating. I've always been fascinated with Japanese culture.
Some of the intrigue there was really, I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but some of that was crazy.
Yeah, and it's a typical theme each episode, and that is this powerful guy wanted this powerful guy's area, and so he attacked this guy, and they would play all kinds of games, political games, and just
nothing was holy. Nothing was holy in that period, it seems, and it's just, it was brothers betraying. It was it was just families destroying each other, and it was crazy. I was quite shocked.
They're ruthless. I mean,
I thought there was a lot more of that honor, and I think they were saying during that 1500 period, the kind of idea of honor was starting to kind of fade out with the large use of the peasant troops and the less use of the samurai. The bringing in of the more machine-like type of warfare, and I think that power vacuum. Everyone was just desperate for power.
Right, and it's a similar theme throughout history, throughout any region at any time, of this ego, the honor, and then it carried all the way through to World War II. How ruthless these Japanese soldiers were, which is why I guess what we're told is that's why they dropped the bombs, because they were afraid of losing so many dudes trying to take the island.
Yeah,
because they were teaching school kids how to kill GIs with bamboo sticks, sharpened bamboo sticks in their schools. They were going to fight you till the last 6-year-old, right? He was going to come up and stab you with a bamboo stick. And they're like, hey, we can't do that. We just have to nuke them, which is awful.
Yeah, they were taught that their emperor was almost a god.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys have heard of Dan Carlin. Anyone in the chat's heard of Dan Carlin? but he only does about maybe 4 podcasts a year, and he's a historian. He does a really great one on on why they dropped that bomb, it was the indoctrination of the populace in Japan. They were never going to give up in a million years, as you say.
No. And yeah, so that would be another great topic for another podcast, would be getting into the whole nuclear period, which I have not gamed any of that. And there's game systems out there that touch on this, and the fact that they brought a lot of those German scientists over there.
Operation Paperclip, yeah.
And fascinating stuff, that how close Hitler was there was salt mines in Austria where were getting really, I think it was within weeks of having an operational nuke they were going to release on the Soviets.
I've never heard of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I watched a documentary about that a couple years ago, that it was kind of brushed under the rug, but there were some of those old dudes that came in when they first were taking land in Austria and liberating those towns. And they were taken by some of the townspeople to where they were working. And, the Nazis had scuttled a lot of stuff, but they left enough that they figured this nuclear scientist they were interviewing said they were probably within weeks of having an operational nuke, but the records had been destroyed. There was a lot of stuff that they had destroyed to cover their tracks. And later on, on their deathbeds, some of these ex-Nazi scientists said they worked over there in that facility. The guys they brought over that basically brought forth the NASA space program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
These are the same dudes. And,
yeah.
They were told to never talk about it. If they did, they would ruin their families. They didn't want people to realize how close it came, I think, and that perhaps we stole a lot of that from them.
100%. I think a lot of these are unidentified flying objects. What's crazy about the UFO thing is, if you look back in the old newspapers, way back, in the 50s, there's some crazy stories where I can't remember what period you might have heard of it, but it was a city in America, and there was a story. It was all over the newspapers. It's not something that was just a few people saying. And there was this huge ship, almost the size of 3 football pitches, that just hovered over the one of these towns, and some crazy stuff back then, and it's just say the amount of people corroborated the same story. It wasn't something like one guy saying he got abducted or anything like that. It was some crazy stuff, Yeah,
I watched a couple of those documentaries a couple of weeks ago when I was stuck inside from the snow. But yeah, and this is we still get a lot of that over here, and even in Mexico, there's sightings, mass sightings, and you kind of wonder the reverse engineering. There's that stuff out there where they've captured things, found things, and reverse engineered things.
It seems to be something like that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We're getting to the point where we got to end the podcast, but it's spaghetti and meatballs on the table tonight, boys, and I'm going to head up, give me another drink. So I want to have you back on the show again, Sammy. It's you're a great contributor. I'd really like to, whenever you can, get on here, and even come with the topic you want to talk about, a specific topic. But I think I'm going to make some notes here on my pad here when we get off the podcast about UFO gaming, because it's out there, because that's a whole other topic we could start touching our toes in. I mentioned it a little bit on the last podcast with the aliens and some of the sci-fi direction games. There's some other stuff out there that Mantic Games has done in the past, which touch on aliens, and then also putting in one of the topics in the future podcast would be that whole period post-war, the nuclear period, and how it affected the outcome of the Korean War, which is another period that's gamed, especially with bolt action. They've come out with the Koreans the last year or so, the Chinese troops that they've introduced into bolt action. And then you get into the Cold War period, And that would be a really good podcast topic, and guys that might be gaming in those periods, and something we could touch on. So thanks for coming in today, Sammy.
It was great. It's great.
Hey, where do you live out over there in the UK?
I'm in London.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Six more weeks of lockdown, so lots of time on my hands.
Right. Well, the company my son works for was going to send him there last year, and of course that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And now they're telling him maybe Singapore. So
Singapore, yeah.
So we'll see where he ends up. He's footloose and fancy free, and I would really like Singapore or London because I'll go visit him.
Yeah,
I always wanted to go over there. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's a great place to be, I think.
Well, thanks again, Sammy.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Stay in touch, and we'll chat. We'll chat on Discord later.
Will do.
Later, man.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
You as well.